Now, the smartest guy with a bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
The mail is rushing at me. I got 2 letters from Brenda Ray Harmer, the inmate in Wartburg, the Morgan County Correctional Complex, on Friday. And one of them contains 3 yellow sort of thermite smelling, not thermite, but some kind of chemically smelling yellow copy sheets that have examples of complaints that he has filed on behalf of other prisoners. And what I like about Brenda Ray Harmer is his name. He's about 60, is that he often cites the rule before making the complaint. He says TDOC policy, Tennessee Department of Correction policy 112.086F states in pertinent part, we're to be provided buildings and housing units that, quote, provide comfort under normal temperature conditions. It's 41 degrees outside and cold air is being pumped into unit number 1, he says. When I brought it to unit manager Gibson's attention about how cold it is, his response was, put on a coat. I'm not going to tolerate this type of treatment. We have to put on a lot of clothing to keep warm. It's not supposed to be like this. Both of my editors will get a copy of this abuse. And he also has another complaint about a man who's being overly drugged, and his name is Taylor, and his number is 582984. Taylor told me that he is on Halidol lithium and Depakote. All 3 medications are probably misspelled, he says. He told me that he is not getting Cogentin or Benadryl. Both medications are probably misspelled, he says. First, because he's not getting Cogentin or Benadryl, he is locking up. Second, he is being over-medicated. Taylor, number 582984. Again, these are slave numbers. We have slavery in Tennessee. I hope you realize that. Slavery is forbidden to private owners such as you, private people such as you, but the state has a cartel or monopoly on slavery. Taylor, number so-and-so, can barely function. When psychotropics are given, they are only supposed to be given enough to make him function normally. Brenda Harmer says in this complaint, and it's the inmate's name is Miriam Taylor, and this is addressed to Warden Sean Phillips in Wartburg, Tennessee. You can see in pictures of this slave camp at Nooganomics.com. That's Nooganomics.com. Taylor is being abused by over-medicating him. Third, any inmate prisoner like Taylor should never be placed in general population or PC status because he will be taken advantage of. Something should be, I can't read that. They're better equipped to handle cases like Taylor's, number 582984. I'm requesting Taylor 582984 be immediately transferred to special needs, and that's signed Brenda Harmer. That's a yellow note, and you can see it here if you're looking at us live on Facebook and live on YouTube. Do like us on Facebook. Please like me, David Tulis. Like our multimedia platform, 92.7 FM and 95.3 HD4. That's high definition digital. And see there on Facebook a copy of I'm holding up this odoriferous piece of yellow transfer paper. Also on YouTube at Hot News Talk Radio. That's our company is Hot News Talk Radio. And there's a third one, and this is a continuing saga, if you will, about the prospect of chiseling. Chiseling is what you find in the union, right? The unions will make up a job. A man is paid all day. He does nothing except turn one button at the end of the day, and that's his job, is to turn that one button. It's called padding or chiseling, and that's taking place against the taxpayers in Tennessee, according to Brenda Harmer, my correspondent in the system. The institution is MCCX, which is Morgan County Correctional Complex. And he says, my current cellie who goes home in the morning and is maxing out said he left the housing unit at 8 a.m. but was held until 12:01 p.m. when he paroled out the last time. He said everybody is held until 12:01 p.m. Every facility I've been at does not do that. Okay, here's why, he says. By 8 a.m., the offender is on his way home or to a bus station. The reason you are holding offenders until 12:01 p.m. is to be funded for the day. Okay, chiseling. I have no reason to doubt my cellie that you are doing this. It's fraud. Please let offender go home or to the bus station by 8 a.m. Grenda Harmer. So we have 3 accounts here of one is of fraud, 2 is of abusive use of the air temperature dial in the guard quarters, and the 3rd is over medication. Well, this is David Tulis, and I do have 2 correspondents. One has Robert Whipple, who had a beautifully typed letter to me just over the mountain in, I think, maybe not Sequatchie County, but maybe, well, one of those counties over there on the other side of the mountain. And his complaint was on the Catch-22 situation on getting a hold of law materials. Now, getting a hold of law materials is a serious issue if you are an inmate, and we just have to think sympathetically about them and hope for the very best. Well, we do glad you're giving us a few minutes of your time. I argue that you should love your neighbor. Buy local. Near is better than far. Small is better than big, and simple than complex, personal than corporate, down there in the footnotes, and physical is better than abstract. Do like us on Facebook. That matters a great deal, and we are glad for your personal attention. Dan Fisher is running for governor in Oklahoma, and he is a man after my own heart. If I were ever going to run for office, which I won't, it would be probably in a defiant manner like this, so defiant that the local press will ignore me. He says you may have read today's issue of the Oklahoman and the article discussing positions of some of the candidates concerning tax increases. Of course, he wasn't mentioned, but this is a man who would probably cut government by a third. Because government is really commercial government. State governments and there's the respective states behind them are commercial strip mining operations by and large. He says, my campaign does not depend on the media liking us or helping us to get out our message. The truth is they won't ever do that anyway. If we believe bowing to the media to earn an occasional mention in the Oklahoman or some other news outlet is necessary for my message to prevail in June, then we should never have started this campaign in the first place. And so his competitors include Todd Lamb and Mick Cornett. Now, what's unusual about this candidate for governor, and you may have seen his video on Nooga Radio, the Nooga Radio page on Facebook, but it's a remarkable video. He makes fun of politicians, and of course, he's running for office as a political figure. But his message is abolition, right? The abolition of abortion. There are about 5,000 Oklahoma baby boys and girls slain in state-protected clinics, cop-protected, sheriff deputy protected, regulator protected abortuaries or abattoirs. An abattoir is a slaughterhouse for cattle, and they are they're cut to pieces in the womb. He says, when I'm finished as governor for 8 years, our state will be considerably smaller and less intrusive in our lives, and therefore will cost considerably less to operate. If I'm elected and the establishment attempts to block my agenda, I will refuse to play the old shell game that is normally played at 23rd and Lincoln, and instead I will name the names of those blocking efforts to reduce the size of government. Now, his position is abortion is murder and should be treated as such. Washington, D.C. bureaucrats and U.S. Supreme Court justices are not the final arbiters of truth. In other words, he disputes the lawyer-fed fantasy that we live in a state of judicial supremacy when, in fact, the Constitution is what is supreme. We have constitutional supremacy. And also his position, again, we're talking about Dan Fisher here for governor. The states and their individual sovereignty matters, and state government should restore true justice. And here we're bringing in the bail bond reform. Our state government does too much and should limit its activities. In other words, he says he believes in old-fashioned conservative values. Now, I think the closest to him in Tennessee is May Beavers. May Beavers is running a field of centrists, you could say. She is as strong as possible. It probably is as strong as one could expect among the candidates for a Republican nominee for governor. She is the one who's closest to this position. He says, unlike poll-driven, fast-talking politicians, I refuse to contour my message just to get elected. Now, there's another man who's like that. There's a report in Yellowhammer News out of Alabama about Roy Moore. And Roy Moore, during the Vietnam conflict in 1971 and 72, was on that battlefront. And according to Bill Staley, he was an honorable, decent, respectable, patriotic commander, and soldier. He was with the 504th Military Police Battalion, stationed at the base camp called Camp Land west of Da Nang. Now, Staley is an attorney. He's been practicing law for nearly half a century and began a career as an assistant U.S. attorney and works at an insurance company. Now, the story is about a change of plans one night in Quang Tri Province, north of Da Nang, and a group was going to go to a regular haunt. He said, I had not met him before, and I don't believe Roy had either. On other occasions, with other officers, we would go to the officers' club at the Air Force Base. But on this occasion, he told us he knew, another man told us he knew of another place in town. When we arrived at the place and went inside, it was clear to Roy Moore, and me that this other man had taken us to a brothel. That officer appeared to know people there, and as he was greeted by one or two of the young women in provocative attire, the place was plush. There were other American servicemen there. Alcohol was being served. There were plenty of very attractive young women, very eager for an intimate time. In less time than it took any of the women to approach us, Roy turned to me. We're talking here about Roy Moore, and it's in Vietnam. It's in a very plush brothel. Listen what happens. Roy turned to me and said words to this effect: "We shouldn't be here. I'm leaving. We shouldn't be here. I am leaving." We told the officer who had brought us that we wanted to leave. He told us to take his Jeep and that he would get a ride back later, which he did. Roy and I drove back to the camp together. That evening, if I hadn't known it before, I knew then that with Roy Moore, I was in the company of a man of great self-control, discipline, honor, and integrity. While there were other actions by Roy that reinforced my belief in him, that one was the most telling. And that is about a man who met him during the war, the Vietnam War, and he says he doubts at all that Roy Moore's character has changed. And Roy was a soldier for whom I was willing to put my life on the line in Vietnam if the occasion ever arose. Unfortunately, it did not. I guess you've heard about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is soaring. It's $9,000. And maybe we'll look at that just a little bit later in the program. This is David Tulis, and we are all about the marketplace, local economy, and the free market, especially small business. There's a story in FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, about a very popular restaurant in New York that went under. And it went under because of circumstances that big business can deal with in stride and not have any problems dealing with, and that is red tape. And the thought is that the China Fund collapsed. This is speaking to the owners, the Wu family. This restaurant went out of business for 25. This is quoting here a New York newspaper. For 25 years, China Fund was renowned. It closed January the 3rd of this year, blamed by management on suffocating government demands. The state and municipal governments, with their punishing rules and regulations, seems to believe that we should be their cash machine to pay for all that ails us in society. Albert Wu, whose parents Dorothea and Felix owned the eatery, said the endless paperwork and constant regulation that forced the shutdown accumulated over the years. Wu cited one regulation where the restaurant was required to provide an on-site break room for workers despite its limited space. And he blamed the amount of paperwork now required, an increasingly difficult task for non-chain businesses. In a one restaurant operation like ours, you're spending more time on paperwork than you are trying to run your business, he gripes. Increases in the minimum wage, health insurance, and insurance added to a list of 10 issues provided by Wu. And I haven't even gone into the health department rules and regulations, he added. For smaller businesses like China Fund, each little thing that occurs makes it harder. Each regulation, this is quoting somebody else now, each regulation, each tax, you put it all together, and it's just a hostile business environment. And that's because big business it can apportion funds for compliance. Small business compliance becomes a much larger portion of the time and energy that goes into operating the business. So you overlook staff problems, you overlook hiring, you overlook quality control. You just don't have time to get to checking the latest shipment of shrimp. You just don't have time to really look at it to see if it's what you want, and so you accept it. And then you have problems with customers. You get the negative review. You have someone hired. You just haven't had time to get to dealing with his problems as a waiter or a cook, and so you have a damaged reputation. Complicated taxes and regulations are a much bigger burden for small businesses than corporations. The big firms have their lawyers and accountants to deal with tax and regulatory compliance. For small business, by contrast, those costs consume, the story says, an enormous percentage of time, energy, and resources for owners. And so that means that the more government you have, by definition, the more government you have, the more advantage flows to big business. So think about that. Big business, and like beckons like, big beckons big, and big business and big government tend to be cooperative. And who suffers? The small. And there have been reports of 2minds.com run by one of my favorite writers, Charles C. Smith, that there has been a long-term evaporation of the creation of small business, a long-term decline in small business. Well, we are here defending local economy. My name is David Tulis. I'm glad you're giving me just a couple minutes of your time. And we argue for local economy, the free market in Chattanooga and beyond. And as we do that, we always want to contrast what the other side believes. Right, the other side, your Lindsey Grahams and your Donald Trumps, they believe in an expansive power, expansive government. There's a story that came out just recently in the New York Times that points out that there are 240,000 active duty and reserve troops in 172 countries and territories, which the Ron Paul Institute of Peace and Prosperity points out is a staggering total. But there's another detail. There's a detail that bears looking at. There are 37,813 soldiers of some kind deployed on a presumably secret assignment in places listed simply as unknown. The Pentagon provided no further explanation. And so is someone like me a traitor? Is someone like me unpatriotic to suggest that we draw down these execrable overages in our adventuresomeness overseas? Lindsey Graham, of course, remember, famously was saying he did when there were four soldiers killed in Niger. He says, I didn't know there was 1,000 troops in Niger. But he said he got a little insight on why they were there and what they were doing. I can say this to the families. They were there to defend America. They were there to help allies. They were there to prevent another platform to attack America and our allies. And he said, we don't know exactly where they're at in the world militarily and what they're doing, which is this Ron Paul suggests is an admission of confusion on the part of the federal Congress that it doesn't know, its members don't know where death is being thrown by our powerful and magnificent forces overseas. U.S. forces are engaged in open warfare in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, carrying out offensive military operations, mostly drone and other airstrikes, but also involving special forces and CIA crash and bash raids in many other countries, including Libya, the Philippines, Somalia, Pakistan, and Yemen. Well, this is David Tulis, and I say these things because I want you to have pause. I want you to think that our problems, really thinking about these things isn't going to really help us solve our problems. And so that's why I tend to not quite get to national stories like that, partly because I want to provide a sense of solutions that we need to have here. And I think there are solutions here. We can't stop these things from happening. Okay, we can't stop this imperial designs on other countries and our intervention in other people's elections and other people's politics. That's what we do. We are famous for coups around the world, and we are indignant to think that Russia may have bought $300,000 or $400,000 worth of advertising on an intergalactic global platform, an advertising platform called Facebook. Somehow we think that Russia may have done that. That's just, we're highly indignant. Well, the fact that that's a story for the media and maybe a story for you suggests that we've kind of lost perspective. The perspective we need to have, I suggest, is loco-centric, Nooga-centric. And that's what I'm arguing for. There are problems that we can solve here, and we can solve them by local action. And the enemy in almost every action that we take, though, is the state. The state is the enemy in almost every action. The state intervenes in many, many areas. It has, in many ways, decapitated the American family, and replaced itself with its own stewards, its own professors, its own technicians, its helpers, its minders, its teachers, its caregivers, and the like. And so there has been a major decapitation by policy of the American family. So we're going to think more about that. This is David Tulis. We're hoping for a free market. We're hoping for executive decisions to be made locally. That's really my argument. Let's stop executive government and have executive decisions made locally. Let there be execution of people's private plans, people's private genius, if you will, here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. Not decisions made for us by our betters, the good people in Washington and Nashville. Love your neighbor, buy local. David Tulis, Nooga Radio.
Traffic, news, and